Alright guys, hello again and welcome to our next video. This video is going to be increasing our knowledge of while loops. I'm going to show you some things that you can do with while loops, two very common applications of them. So let's say that we are trying to find a total of a series of numbers. So let's just begin. We will do num equals int input please enter a number. Something very simple. And when we have a total, if we say something like total equals total plus the number, and down here we'll print the total. And here let's just add the total is, add that onto that. So just real fast, save this, total and average with while loops. You get an error with that. The variable total and count, those type of variables, we call those accumulators. They're variables that you're going to add to. And if we go back to our code quick, this line right here, I kind of threw it in there without mentioning too much about it. That line says whatever you typed in, add that to a total. But the computer doesn't realize that total starts at 0. It doesn't assume that. You have to tell it that. So again, this goes right to left. You're saying take whatever you have as the current total and add a number to it, and then make that your new total. So like right now, 0, if you type in 5, 0 plus 5, the new total is 5. But again, it doesn't know that that's 0 until you tell it. So we want to make sure that first, we want to be sure to initialize any what we call accumulators to 0, like total and count, which we're going to need for this program because, as you probably figured from my save name of the file, this is going to be an average we're going to do. So to do an average, you need the total, but you also need the count. And so I have this total variable. And the reason I haven't put any while loops in yet is, when you do while loops, when you do any kind of loops, you want to make sure that you're putting it in the correct spots. If you include the total equals 0 in your loop, that's going to reset the total every single time. We certainly don't want to do that. So I'm going to tab this in, and I'm going to say while. And now, as you hopefully by now from class have learned, the while loop is like a loop, like an if statement, but it also repeats things. So when you say this, what should you say? So let's say that we have a loop where we're going to end with the person typing in -1, let's say. So let's say we're averaging together a whole bunch of positive numbers, like grades. And if you type in -1, it'll quit. So if I say while the number is not equal to -1, remember not equal to is the exclamation mark equals. And when you say while, you're saying keep doing this while this is the case. So as long as it's not -1, keep doing this. As soon as it is -1, that's when it stops. So down here, I'm going to add to my input. I'm going to say please enter a number, but I'm also going to put in parentheses here in the quotes -1 to quit, something along those lines. We call that a sentinel value. It's a value that stops the loop. So in doing this, we now have a variable that's going to print a total as we go. So let me just run this real fast. Uh-oh. Well, now what? Num is not defined. Well, let's go back. You're doing this while loop. You're trying to say what's num? But the problem is you're checking it before you ever use it. You can't really say what's number equal to before you typed it in. Well, that causes a problem because how are you going to do that before the while loop? Well, we have a couple of different options here. I could initialize number to something also. I could say let number equal 0, and that'll fix our issue, because now the computer knows that num is equal to something. So if I type 5, the total is 5. 9, now it's 14. 5 plus 9 is 14. 3, 9, and so on and so forth. It's going to keep adding up, which again, that's the idea of a loop. The idea of a loop is that you repeat the code until something happens. And that something is, if I type -1, it'll quit. But you might see down there at the bottom what's a little bit problematic about it. We don't want to include -1 in our total. -1 is the value that we stop upon. And so going back to the code, one thing that hopefully you are getting used to is being able to read through code, understand the flow of it. So in our loop, it's going to repeat these 3 lines, but if you type -1 here, it's still going to add that to the total, and it's still going to print out our new total, which is inaccurate now that we've typed in -1. So we'll deal with that in a moment. The other thing we want, because we're going to be doing a total and an average, we need the number of numbers we've typed in. So I'm going to also put in a variable for count. How many numbers are there? Count equals 0. Every time I type in a number, I'm going to say also, oops, that's not what I wanted there. Count equals count plus 1. So to find an average, you're totaling the numbers up, you're accumulating the numbers, but you're also saying add 1 to the count. And so the idea is when we're completely finished, after the loop is done, we're going to say average equals the total divided by the count. Just how you find the average. And then also print the average is, comma, average. But again, the -1 is going to throw us off here. The -1 is going to throw us off because it's going to be counted in the total, but it's also going to be counted in the number of numbers I have. And I really don't want that to happen. I don't want -1 to be part of my average. And so like I said, there's a couple of ways you can deal with this. One thing you can do is right here after you type in a number, you could also put this in. You put a little if statement. If the number is not equal to -1, then let's tab this in a little bit. And so now, again, looking at the tabbing, all of this code is underneath the loop. It keeps repeating. But then inside of that, you have a second tab because you have an if statement. You say, if the number is not -1, let's do some more of this. Let's say total equals total plus num, add 1 to the count, print the total. So again, it doesn't include the -1 in my total or my average. Let's try it out. Let's just do some numbers that are pretty straightforward. So if I do 5 and 6, the average of that, 5 and 6 should be 5.5. So -1, and it gives me the average is 5.5. Fantastic. So that's what I want. Going back into my code here, I don't necessarily have to print the total every time as I go. I could take that and put it down here and untab it again. I could say, there's my final total, there's my average, and then print my average. So the only thing really that goes in my loop is you type in a number, you allow the input to be done multiple times, and then as long as the number is not -1, include it in my total. So there's many different applications you can do with while loops, but adding up numbers, averaging numbers, which is obviously related to totaling up numbers, is a very common algorithm. The other measures of central tendency, like median, mode, things like that, we can't do those yet because we need something called a list. We're only doing the numbers as we go, so we can only really total them. We can't really sort them yet. We can't say which is the middle number. None of those things work until we get to something we're going to do later called list. But something relatively straightforward, like averaging up all the numbers, or finding the largest, finding the smallest, we can do those things. So, thanks for watching. Take care.